but I'm gonna start the recording, so we'll be all preserved digitally forever.
No, I feel safe.
It's the whole Taylor family is here, but they're so dark. It's lighting. Oh, when you're muted.
There you go. Must be on the beach.
It's okay. You don't have. You can unmute.
It really is the whole Taylor family.
I know. Look at that. Hello, people. They're still muted. It's okay. Wonderful.
Let me see if Max wants to go.
You would like it.
There they are. Say something. Oh, there's no microphone. That's okay.
Can't hear you.
I know. All right. Let's get started. Welcome. Thanks for coming out on a Friday night. Gee whiz, it's 7 o'clock. And you guys are interested in tube guitar amplifiers like I am. There's one right behind me, a little cherry Fender Deluxe amp that I made right there at Decatur Makers. And we're going to talk about a really similar amplifier layout tonight. But first, let me give a disclaimer that I don't know what I'm talking about at all. I have absolutely no training in electronics, and I only remember one thing from physics in college or even high school, which I'll tell you later on. I only know one thing, which is why we have to your left, my right, Bill Sandidge is the way that my screen's organized. Bill, tell everyone about yourself.
Well, I'm an electrical engineer, so I know how electrons flow and voltage works. And I know nothing about guitar amps as far as the sound and so forth, but I can talk a lot about how the circuits work. So hopefully we can tie those together.
Nice.
I just like it when stuff makes noise. So that's what I'm bringing to this. And I'm interested in learning how that happens. So Bill's helped me. He actually helped me put together that Fender Deluxe amp and many other things as well, many other guitar amps and speaker too. Can you talk about the speakers that we see behind you? You look like you're ready to go back to the future.
These things? Have any of you been in the speaker class? Maybe, I don't know. We've had a design and build your own speaker class at Decatur Makers. We've done a couple times, and I was actually at the beginning of March about to do another one with Chris. We do it together, and I bought all the components and had all the layouts done, and something came along and kept us from doing that. But in the meantime, the last couple of years, I've been collecting at thrift stores these very nice high-end speakers that are $5 and $10 a pair. And it's because, I don't know if I can, maybe you can see this. You see all those holes in there?
Oh, yeah.
It's because
These
surrounds, they rot over the years. And the rest of it is perfectly fine and intact. And what you do is you go buy a kit that comes with one of these pre-cut surrounds for the particular speaker and a tube of glue, and you cut the old one out and you glue the new one in, and you have a very nice set of speakers for not a lot of money. But my particular thrift store tends to have lots of good deals, and over the years I've got, let's see, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm on my 7th set repairing right now. I saved this last one because I wanted to do it with some other people and train people on it. But also, like I said, we had a class coming, and I have up here at the very top is the set of prototype speakers for the next class. So as soon as we are allowed to have 12 students and Chris and I in the makerspace at the same time, we're going to have a speaker class. And for in the $50 range, they'll teach you the basics of how they work, how to design your own, and then we're actually going to build this set of speakers and you take those home. So looking forward to that very soon, I hope.
Fun.
I hope so too. I really hope we can get back to that real soon.
I'm hoping in July is my goal this summer, but I was hoping March, then April, then May.
Well,
Yeah,
I think we should dive right in and start talking about this cute little amplifier, the Fender Champ. And I realized that I actually didn't put a picture of that in here, but I'm going to try to share my screen with you and talk a little bit about this circuit. And thank goodness Bill's here because, man, I got a lot of questions about this thing. But I'm going to start with what I do know. I've got a little presentation here on my iPad, and I'm going to try to share that with you guys. All right. This is all the electronics that I know about right here, what I remember from physics class. Before you get to the amplifier, right, you've got an electric guitar that needs to be amplified. And in that electric guitar, you have these things. These are electric guitar pickups. This is the simplest kind of pickup. And what it is it's a series of magnets. And is that laser showing up for you guys? Can you see the little laser point?
Yes.
Okay. There's magnets. There's one for each string. And the strings would actually lie over each one of these magnets, right? And then there's the coil of insulated copper wire that's wound around all 6 of these magnets. And this is the one thing I remember about physics. It's called the right-hand rule. And what it is, if you put your right hand out in front of you, everybody should do this right now. You're on camera. I can see that you're not doing it. Put your right hand out in front of you and give the thumbs up. Put your thumb straight up in the air. And then wrap your fingers around towards you, kind of like you're making a fist, right? Not quite a tight fist. Relax. It's Friday. All right. So this is one of Faraday's discoveries. I learned that if you have a magnetic field that's oriented in the direction that your thumb is pointing, right? Oscillations or changes in that magnetic field are going to induce a current or a potential current, actually, in a wire that's coiled around the magnet in the direction of your fingers. And that is super handy because that's, that's how rock and roll is made. That's how electric guitars work. So as these strings are vibrating back and forth, right, with the frequency of the note that you're playing, you're actually inducing a change in the magnetic field local to one of these magnets. And that's going to cause an oscillation in potential current that can flow through this coil of wire and ultimately out of the coil. And if you plug it into your amplifier, that's the signal that you're going to amplify. And here, my knowledge of electronics kind of ends. But we're going to take a trip through the circuit of the Fender Champ amp, or at least as far as we can get. We'll try to understand as much as we can. And I encourage you guys to chime in and ask questions along the way as well. But that signal that we just talked about in the pickup comes in one of 2 places on the Champ amp. It has 2 inputs. The deluxe model has 4 separate inputs. It's got 2 sort of separate amplifiers here. There's 1 amplification circuit in the Champ, but you can plug 2 things into it. So let's plug here into the one that says high, and let's follow through the circuit the path of that of that signal that started as an oscillation in the string that caused an oscillation in the magnetic field that induced a current in the coil and entered the amplifier here. The goal, of course, is to make something really loud come out of, pleasing to the ear, come out of this thing, the speaker side. So let's see if we can't get from here in the circuit all the way to here. And I think for you, it'd be easier just to look at this schematic. We'll keep coming back to this. But for me, it's easier to actually look at the layout of the amp. Because if you open your amplifier, you're not going to see that schematic. You're going to see this. There's a big old power transformer on top of the chassis. There's, it's not really pictured here, but there's an output transformer. There's the inputs to the output transformer, and there's the outputs. There's a speaker jack. And then there's these three sockets for vacuum tubes. And I guess we'll talk about them when the signal gets to the tube. Are there any questions so far? Did any of that make sense? I wonder. Jerry, welcome. Hello, Jerry. Oh, he's connecting to audio. It's my father-in-law just joined us. That's great.
Oh.
I'm trying to open the chat just to see if there's anything. If you can add virtual backgrounds, you can download a photo of Bill's basement here.
I was about to say, what is Maureen doing in my basement? I was going to compliment her on her shop.
That's awesome. Jerry, welcome. Hello.
Great.
Can you hear us okay? All right. Okay, so we took a brief look at the schematic, and we showed the output of the speaker in that schematic, and we're going to start here at the input jack, and we're going to follow that signal from the tip of your guitar cord. It actually touches part of the jack that sends a signal down this line, and the first thing that it gets to is a little resistor. And if we zoomed in, we'd see this is a 68K resistor. The text here on this image says that it's a grid stopper. And I think we're going to have to come back to that once we figure out what it's supposed to stop and what a grid is. Bill, maybe you can talk a little bit right now about what is it that's traveling down this wire? It's electrons, isn't it? Are they moving?
Oh, yeah. And they have to. Well, let's see. How do I put this? The pickup is putting out a voltage, a varying voltage, and it's going to be in the maybe 1/20th of a volt up to maybe for humbuckers. I've read that it can get up to a 1/2 a volt, but that's
all right.
That's a pretty strong signal. So there's not a lot of voltage to it, and there's also not a lot of current behind it. There's just not a lot of energy in it. But nevertheless, it is still the induced voltage is going to force a current to travel through those wires into the grid on the tube, through the grid stoppers.
So, and for those of us who forget how voltage is related to current, voltage is kind of like the potential that a particular current has to make its way through a particular resistance.
Would you care for me to expand on that?
Sure.
Yeah. In any electrical circuit, you're going to have voltage and you're going to have current. If you have current flow, you have to have voltage because the voltage is the driving force. Voltage is the pressure in the system. Imagine your garden hose. If you have no pressure in the garden hose, you get no flow of water. Electricity is the same way. Voltage begets current. voltage is the pressure, current is the flow. So in this case, we have guitar strings wiggling around inside of a magnetic field that creates a voltage in that pickup, and that voltage is going to force current to travel through the lines into the input of the grid on that tube. Let's stop with that right now and wait till we get to the tubes. It makes more sense out of that.
All right. Oh, but this is probably a good time to, I can't see my pointer on the screen anymore. Do I need to refresh? Is that not coming through?
You might, yeah, it's gone.
Okay, let me try this. One more try. It was working pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it worked at the beginning.
Yeah, now you guys should be able to see it. All right, there we go.
Yep.
So what's complicating stuff is that voltage, because the string is wiggling around, voltage is actually oscillating up and down at the same frequency that the string is moving. So I don't know if it's the current that's oscillating. So it's an alternating current. It's an AC signal. Right, Bill?
Correct.
Yeah, I hope so.
As opposed to DC, which is just a steady voltage of whatever number it happens to be. Yes.
The voltage is changing, and it's changing as it comes into this resistor, and it's changing as it comes into this pin of the first vacuum tube that we get to, which is a 12AX7, and my AX7 is in the amp right now, but here, I'll show you. This is one that's really similar to that. This is an AU7, and it kind of works the same way. And I don't think it's focusing on it exactly correctly, but if you look inside the thing, there you go, you can actually see there's two sort of stacks of little black pieces of metal. One on this side and one on this side. Not sure how well that's coming through. There we go. You can actually see a groove in between them right now. Two stacks. So there's actually two little amplifiers inside this type of tube. And we just sent a signal. Let's go back to that layout into one side of it. There it is. Right here. So let's take a look at kind of a schematic of what different types of tubes do. And Bill, this is where I really need some help. So, the simplest case of a tube is this diode tube. It's just got these two components to it. There's something called a plate and something called a cathode. And what happens is those electrons we talked about before will leap from one place to the other when there's a voltage applied to this side of it, and this cathode gets to the point where it starts releasing electrons in that direction. Jerry's here, and he was in the Radio Shack in the Navy, so I think he can chime in and help us explain the diodes as well. Oh, if you want to. Oh, you're muted then. Or Bill. Have I got that right?
Yeah. What happens is the cathode in the tube is heated. There's a filament inside there, and if you've ever seen a tube, you might notice that they glow red hot. That's because the filament is heating up the cathode, and that makes it start spitting out electrons. And the plate will have a positive voltage on it. And it works very much like with a pair of magnets. You've got a north and a south pole, and the the north attracts the south, the positive plate is going to attract the negative electrons. So that cathode spitting out, in the diode tube, the cathode spitting out electrons, and they're being drawn over to the plate to create a current flow. A current flow is just electrons moving from one point to another.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Let's say that you had an AC signal that's coming into the diode, right?
Right.
If this is going negative for part of the time, right? So when you're below, down here in the minus territory, then you know, part of your signal actually isn't going to get sent then. You're only going to be sending during these periods, right?
That's a very good point. The whole reason why it's called a diode and the function of the diode is that current can only flow. The electrons can only come out of the cathode and head to the plate. They will not come from the plate and travel back into the cathode. They're blocked. Because the cathode is hot and it's spitting out all these electrons, whereas the plate itself is cool. It won't emit any electrons. So what will happen is if the voltage is in the right direction, you'll have current flow through it. If the voltage is reversed, it gets blocked. And that's the function of a diode.
In the UK, they have like a totally different vocabulary for everything over there. The elevators are lifts, and the trunk is the boot, and the hood is the bonnet. And these tubes, they call valves. And so that actually does kind of work like a valve for electrons that only lets them flow in one direction.
That's where the name came from.
Cool beans. I didn't know that for sure. I just suspected it was true.
Yeah, the rectifier tube, the diode, the valve you see there, that's the very first tube. Was somebody stuck an extra electrode inside of a light bulb. And essentially, when you do that, you end up with a rectifier tube. And they noticed current was coming out of it, thought that was kind of strange, and studied it. And now we're sitting here talking about it 120 years later.
And I got to say, I think it's still the best way to make an electric guitar amplifier. There's other ways that you can do it, but I think these sound better.
They do.
I hope that at some point we can get to why that might be. But to get there, I think we need to go on. Well, actually, I need to reshare this thing because it stops letting me laser point after a delay for some reason. So pardon me while I get this running again. And we were going to talk about the triode. So like you said, this cathode is heated by a heater. That makes it shoot electrons across this distance that is a vacuum, right? So there's nothing interfering with the passage of those electrons. And this plate has a high voltage applied to it, high positive voltage. And so it's very attractive to these electrons that are boiling off of the cathode and coming across here. So you've got this huge potential of energy between the cathode and the plate. And because you've applied a super high voltage to the plate, it's attracting all those electrons. Now, this is the craziest way of amplifying a signal. It's just baffling to me that someone actually thought of doing this. That oscillation in voltage that we saw that's oscillating with the movement of the string, that signal from your guitar, it went through one resistor, right, that 68K resistor, and then it's coming into this part, the grid. When that signal's going negative, right, that's going to repel some of those electrons that are coming off because, right, negative repels negative.
Right.
When it's going positive, it's going to sort of nudge them along from the cathode to the plate. So the flow of electrons is interrupted by the signal from the grid. And so you get an oscillation in this big signal going from cathode to plate that is, I don't know, is it fair to say it's modulated by your signal here?
That's
but the
exactly
magnitude,
yes, it modulates it.
But the magnitude of that signal that comes out here is much, much greater than the tiny signal that goes into the grid from your guitar. That's insane. No, seriously, you just applied, what is it, hundreds of volts to,
Hundredths.
well, no, hundreds to the plate, right?
Yes. Yeah, 300.
You've got 300 volts to this. If you're interested in mucking the stuff, I guess we should have started with, don't touch it. Don't touch the inside of the amp, because they are super high voltages, and it can really hurt you pretty bad.
Fast.
Yeah, it'll kill you, and it'll hurt the whole time that you're dying. So, all right. So we just changed this dinky little signal from your guitar into a much bigger signal coming out of this side just by mucking about with the flow of electrons that we induced by applying a super high voltage to the plate. But we're not nearly done. So that's just right here. That's what happens between these 2 points where your signal came in, and because this is the cathode side of the tube, of one side of this tube, and this is the plate side of the tube, and so we're coming out with a greatly amplified signal that's carrying that musical signal from your electric guitar, and it's going to flow up here through this capacitor that I don't know what it does, but I do know what this thing does. I said you had to apply hundreds of volts to the plate, and it actually comes in this way to get to that plate through this resistor. We're like, well, where are you going to get a whole bunch of volts? Well, it actually comes from over here, from the power transformer. But eventually, we'll get back to that side later. I didn't mean to spring this on you, Bill, but I have no idea what this. It says it's a coupling capacitor. So I don't know what it's doing to the guitar signal coming out. Or is it related to the voltage going into the plate?
It's a coupling capacitor, but it's better called a blocking capacitor, because what comes out of that tube is a combination of, looking at my chart here, about 150 volts DC, which is not going to do you any good down the line, and then a volt or two of AC, changing back and forth. We've gone from maybe 1/10 of a volt coming in, and then that stage has amplified it by about 60 times, so we've got about 6 volts changing. This is where things get kind of weird. You've got 150 volts coming out of there, and as it goes up and down with the guitar strings motion, it's going to go up and down by, say, 3 volts, up 3, down 3. So that's going to give you maybe a 6 volt change in the output.
From peak to trough.
Yeah, and that's the AC. That's what we want, but it's mixed in with 150 volts or so of DC, which is left over from the power supply, to put it crudely. But so that's a blocking capacitor, a coupling capacitor. It basically it prevents that DC from traveling into the next stage, where we once again bring it from 6 volts up to the next level.
What you just said is starting to ring a bell. I knew that there was still some DC in there, and yeah.
There's 2 most common uses for capacitors, and one is this, where you've got some circuit that's got some DC in it, and you want to block that and just send the AC, whether it's audible or if it's some radio frequency or something, onto another stage. The capacitor will block that. And then the other thing is it will act as a filter, which you'll see. I think there's another one somewhere else in the circuit we can talk about.
All right. Next step, it comes out of that coupling capacitor, right? And this is that AC signal that we still have. And then it goes into this, which is a potentiometer or a pot, which is basically a variable resistor, as I understand it. So this is the volume knob on your Fender Champ. It's the only knob that this amp has. That's how simple this amplifier is. So on the other side of this potentiometer, you've got a knob with a little plastic handle on it. It's shaped like a chicken head. They call it a chicken head knob. And so you can block that signal, turn it all the way so it doesn't make any noise, or even better, turn it all the way up. Turn up to 11. My deluxe actually goes to 12. So
Even better.
it's one better, isn't it? All right, so
Better.
you have control over what comes out of this pot by turning your volume knob. And where does it go when it comes out? Well, let's follow this line. It actually goes on the underside of this board, the way this is laid out. And then well, check it out. It actually goes back to the 12AX7. But remember, I said that the 12AX7 has 2 diodes in it.
Right.
So 2 triodes. So it has 2 sides. It's 2 amplifiers in one. And let's see if we can go back to the triode. So there's one side of the 12AX7 that has one of these. We already went through that stage. Now we have our amplified signal that's limited by the volume knob as much as you want. Don't limit it. Just turn it all the way up. And we get our AC signal that's been amplified going into the grid on the second side of the 12AX7, where we do this crazy thing again. We're boiling off electrons from the cathode. They're leaping across to the plate. They're interfered with in a way that's proportional to the now louder, stronger signal that was amplified by the first side. And you get output from this high voltage plate that is amplified even more. I have no idea how much.
In the same range.
So we amplified it 60 times, and now we did it 60 more times.
Right.
Whoa. That's insane. That's cool.
Yeah.
I think that's neat. All right. That happens on this side of the 12AX7. And that's the cathode side, this pin. And, I hope you got to look at the pins when I was showing you the 2 before. This has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pins to it. So half of them are devoted to 1 amp, half of them devoted to the other one, ish. This is the plate. And we've got that voltage coming in. It's labeled B+3. Right? That high voltage is applied to this plate. And then the varying AC voltage is coming out this side. There's another coupling capacitor here. And then we get sent to another tube. And this is the power tube. And the Fender Champ calls for a 6V6 power tube. The 12AX7 is essentially 2 triode tubes. The 6V6 is a different beast altogether. And this gets a little complicated. It's a pentode tube. Man, Bill, I watched this guy's great video last night, but I'm going to need some help to get through this. Here's what I got out of that. Same principle as before. We're heating a cathode. We're applying high voltage to this plate. We're boiling off electrons that are going to leap across the vacuum here from cathode to plate. We're modulating that voltage with our now twice amplified electric guitar signal coming into the grid. But there's these other 2 grids that are further changing the signal. And Jerry and Bill or anybody else can please jump in and help me out this one. Here's my rudimentary understanding of it. the screen grid has a voltage that applied to it that is positive, I think.
Yes, comparable to what is on the plate.
So it kind of urges the electrons along, and it accelerates them even more as they boil off the cathode and slam into the plate. So the screen grid gives them a little extra oomph.
Well, it kind of masks off the plate.
Okay.
Trying to think of, I haven't even come up with an explanation in my own mind that I can speak and make sense out of it. But ultimately, it ends up masking off the plate, and it improves the function of the grid itself as far as controlling the current
of the input grid here.
Right.
So we could have stopped there and had a cathode, a grid, the screen grid, and the plate, and then we'd have what's called a tetrode. But the problem is that those electrons, partly because of the influence of the screen grid, are slamming into the plate so much that some of them are actually bouncing back. And that can, these secondary sort of reflections of electrons coming off of the plate in the wrong direction can interfere with your signal. And so a third grid was added, a suppressor grid, and it actually has a negative voltage applied to this one to sort of encourage those electrons that might be headed in the wrong direction to actually, okay, just turn around and go back where you came from. I'm sure that that's a vast oversimplification.
No, actually, that was pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, basically, it just it pushes the electrons back into the plate, keeps them from going where they don't belong.
Oh, thank goodness! You're being nice.
Oh no. No, the suppressor is easy. The screen, that's different.
So this relationship might be a little more complicated, and I encourage you to go out and learn more about how tetrodes work and stuff like that. They're important in other types of circuits, and I don't see tetrode tubes in electric guitar amps. You might see them in like radio stuff to deal with RF signals, but they don't really help to amplify things on these frequencies, as far as I understand.
Well, I could be wrong, but I think the tetrode probably had a short life because soon after, or around the time of the tetrode coming out, they figured out the suppressor grid, and we end up with pentodes, which are much superior in many ways. And we're talking, the 6v6 that is in this amp came out in 1936.
Wow.
So this has been, we're talking about your grandfather's or great-grandfather's tube circuits here. There's nothing new about them. But my guess is the tetrode came along and somebody put a suppressor in and they said, fine, that's even better. And so they kind of disappeared.
I got to reestablish connection to the iPad because we got a little digression there. But what a fantastic time to be alive and be playing with really high deadly voltages in the 30s.
Tetrodes actually lasted for a decent while, but only really with radios.
Oh, really?
Later on, they got replaced with pentrodes, mostly because they started with a larger frequency range than what tetrodes were able to do comfortably.
Right.
They mostly used tetrodes because they were cheaper.
Yeah.
Oh. By a significant margin.
Yeah, fewer parts, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And we're dealing with frequencies that are in an entirely different range than in that RF range. And so this pentode, that 6v6, is extremely efficient at boosting that voltage. But again, same principle. And this one only has one side to it. So this one cathode, it's got an input coming into the cathode side right here, and sorry, to the grid side right here. That's where the input comes in, and we've got the plate signal is coming out. We're done. This goes to the output transformer.
So that blue line from the plate?
Yeah. Right here.
Yep. Nice.
Yep. Yeah. So this is the plate. This is the final voltage that gets sent to the output transformer. Oh, and this is where I get lost. There's a clue as to what that output transformer is actually doing, right where that laser pointer is lagging right there. So where it says 8K:4 ohm, and as I understand it, that's the job of the output transformer. That's all. That's really all that it does. Is it takes this oscillation, this AC oscillation, and it changes the impedance, which is kind of like, it's sort of analogous to resistance in an AC circuit. It changes the impedance from 8,000 ohms down to 4 ohms so that it can drive your speaker that you've plugged into your speaker jack here. Oh, man, I know I got something wrong there.
No.
That's all the output transformer does, gee whiz.
It matches the high impedance output of the tube to the low impedance of the speaker.
Why are they so expensive?
Well, for one thing, the audio transformers are wound differently from your regular power transformer, typically, and the metal in them is different. The windings are wound differently. Often they use special wire, bifilar wires for one thing. I don't know about in this particular transformer, but the bottom line is they're not your everyday just wrap a coil around some metal kind of transformers.
All right. Well, wait a minute. Does the out transformer need to be powered?
Well, no. The purpose of another way of describing the purpose of the output transformer is yeah, it is impedance matching, but what it's doing is let's say we have 5 watts. You're really cranking this thing out, but you're only going to get about 5 watts of sound power out of this. The 5 watts is coming out of that tube into that transformer, but it's coming out as several hundred volts with just a little bit of current. And power, wattage, is voltage times current. So if you have hundreds of volts times fractions of amps, you can have 5 watts. But in the 8 ohm speaker, you're only going to have, let's see, 5 watts is V squared over 8 times 40. You're going to have like 6 volts or something. But you're going to have a lot more current. So what the transformer does is it transforms a high voltage to a low voltage and a low current up to a high current in proportion. So the voltage times current in equals the voltage times current out. And that's, in this case, that's the function of the transformer, is to make that impedance transformation.
So is that why the voltages are getting pushed so high?
Well, you need high voltages for the tubes to operate.
Okay.
So
I was trying to figure like what kind of, if you're going up by 60x, and then whatever the last tube did, that seems like a very high voltage.
Well, now that's what they're capable of doing. But in reality, that's not what actually happens in the circuit, because a couple of things happen. One is, if we didn't have the negative feedback, which we never talked about, you didn't have that, this thing would be multiplying the input by this like 30,000 or something crazy like that. And obviously this is not putting out 30,000 volts.
Well, let me ask 2 things here, Bill. One is we coming out of this tube, we have an oscillation that is a high voltage but relatively low current oscillation.
Exactly.
And coming out of the output transformer, what you just said was we're going to change that to a lower voltage oscillation but with more current so that we're able to push this speaker and move it back and forth and actually push some air so you can hear what you're playing.
Right.
Okay, so that at least is in the right direction. But my other question, and I'll just repeat what Laird just said, is that we're dealing with some seriously high voltages that we were mucked about with the input signals to these grids, one here at the 12AX7, one on the other side of the 12AX7, and then another one here at the 6V6. Those high voltages that are applied to the plate, they've got, and there's actually two plates here on this side, they've got to come from somewhere. So let's talk about the power supply, and let's get to this last tube here, which is not a pentode, and it's not a triode. I think it's a diode.
It's
Is that
just a diode.
the
Dual diode.
5Y3? Right. So the 5Y3 has a diode on each side.
Right.
And it's getting, let's see, it's getting an output from a power transformer. But let's actually go over to this very first side. This is the power cord. And it's plugged into your household outlet, which, as far as I understand, it's AC, isn't it? So it's
60 cycles, 120 volts.
120 volts AC. It's going through this fuse, thankfully, right? And well, let's see. Oh, and it actually goes to, oh, sorry. Come on, people. It goes to a power switch. It actually does not go into the volume pot. You're not going to get electrocuted if you touch the volume knob unless something's gone horribly wrong. There's a power switch that's not pictured here, and then that's the input in the power transformer. And there are outputs. There's actually two low voltage outputs. One goes to heat the cathode in the dual diode 5Y3 rectifier tube. And the other is 6.3 volts, and it goes to the heaters. Remember, we have to heat those cathodes in the 66 and both sides of the 12AX7. So those heaters have to have a voltage applied to it. They're just filaments like a light bulb, right? That heat up the cathode, so it releases its electrons. But the voltage that's going to the 5Y3 is an AC voltage, right? So we're getting an oscillation in voltage, and the power that's applied to the plate here and these two plates on the AX7, that's a DC voltage, right?
Yes.
So that's why we need this rectifier, right? So if we remember the schematic here, when we have this AC signal coming into a diode, it's only this part here that's getting passed to the plate. So this signal actually looks kind of lumpy. You said it's 60, this oscillation happens 60 times in a second, so these things are really close together in time. And so what you end up with coming out of the plate is this sort of bumpy voltage coming out of there. And I think, and here's where I need some help from you and Jerry, I think somehow that's what these things are for.
Those are the power supply filter capacitors. So they're doing the filtering function I talked about before.
So the DC voltage is not the constant coming out of here, the DC out, the B plus that's going into this bank of filter capacitors here, it's not a straight 300, 320, 350 volts or whatever that you want to apply at the plates here. And here and here, right? Sorry, here and here are the plates, and here is the plate for the 6v6. But coming into this part right here, it's not oscillating in the negative direction, but it's kind of bumpy. And is it true that that's what the job of these capacitors is to sort of flatten out that bump?
Yeah, the bumps, it's called ripple. And each one of those reduces it a little further down the line from C3 to C4 to C5. As you go left to right, it's going to be a little less ripply. Which is important because as it goes from left to right, it's powering more and more sensitive stages. So,
and the most sensitive being on this side.
Right.
So that's B3. That's been filtered 3 times by these very large high voltage capacitors coming here to one side and here to the other side of the 12AX7.
And that
whereas
that
the
ripple
B2
can get through into your audible path. So if you've ever heard a crappy amp that sits there and hums when you're not playing it, that's what we're talking about. Possibly, that's what it is.
So the B2 hasn't been filtered quite as much?
More. B2 is filtered more than B1. B3 is filtered more than B2.
Oh, I see. Because I got you. I got you. So B1 is filtered the most, and it's going to the output transformer?
No, it's filtered the least.
The least.
Not intentionally. It just happens. You want the highest voltage going to the output because that gives you the highest power.
Right.
The input stages don't really require as much voltage, and you get the benefit, as you're dropping a little bit of voltage as you go from left to right there. And that's okay because you don't need as much voltage on the front end as you do when you're trying to drive the output. You get maximum power. I'm
starting to get it. And I think we've come back around to the part that we should have said at the very beginning, is that these capacitors are massive. These are high voltage capacitors, store charge for a really long time, even after you cut off this power switch. So if you decide to build one of these, and I think that you should, I think everyone should build a Fender Champ amp. Actually, I'm going to build a couple. I'm looking forward to it. Even with the power switch off, these things can store enough voltage that if released, like if you accidentally brush up against this with your pinky, it'll put you on the floor. Am I wrong there? It's these that you have to watch for.
You do it once, and then you'll know better.
There you go.
Yeah, if you make it.
If you make it.
Yeah, well, that or you know it forever.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, it hurts the whole time that you're dying.
Those also tend to be one of the most expensive parts because they have to be able to support such a high voltage.
Yep.
Of all of these components, you're absolutely right. But taken all together, right, these passive components that you have in here are fairly inexpensive, and you can get kits of the Champ amp for less than $200 that even include a really nice shiny chrome chassis that's been silk screened and everything. The expensive part is in the power transformer and in the output transformer that's not pictured here. Those can get kind of pricey, but those kits actually do include the transformers, but I think they make up the bulk of the cost of the item.
Oh yeah, very much so. Transformers are very pricey.
We've been going on and we're closing in on the hour, and I didn't stop to ask if there were any questions, but I think that we accomplished our mission. We started with the signal from your electric guitar that went into the input jack. We amplified it one time on this side of the 12AX7 and sent that to the volume control knob. Then we came back to the other side of the 12AX7 and then went into the 6V6, and then we went to the output transformer and then out the speaker, and we made some noise.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So what makes tube amps so smooth sounding, and then when you crank them up, what makes the crunch?
I was about to say maybe we should talk about that, what makes them special. Do you have those curves I sent you?
This one?
There's your answer.
Okay.
This
might be a whole nother.
Of course.
Friday, but maybe we can get
obvious. In any kind of tube circuit, if you, let's see, where do I start here? You see those sloped lines, the lower one I've marked as 5K, and then the upper one is 5K shifted. What this is the load line for the output tube, the 6V6. It's called a load line. And what you're looking at is those curved lines that kind of sweep up from the left. Each of those will be, say, 0 volts or -5 or -10, -15, -20. That's the voltages coming into the grid on this tube. And this -16 volt point that is circled right there, that's called the operating point or the bias point or the quiescent point. There are different terms for it, but basically when it's just sitting there warmed up and no sound coming through it, the output of that is going to be at 350 volts and going to have 35 milliamps running through it. If the input to that goes up by, say, 5 volts, the output's going to go down by a certain amount if the input sliding along that line. And if the input goes up by 5 volts, the output is going to go up by a certain amount. But you'll notice 5 volts down is further than 5 volts up. There's a difference between those two. And what that ends up doing is it ends up distorting the signal that comes in. It's producing distortion by doing that. And that distortion is key to the sweet sound of a tube amplifier. That is really, I wouldn't say 90%, that is most of the sweet sound of a tube amplifier, is because it's actually taking a nice clean signal and distorting it. And when you distort it, you're adding more frequency components to it. Let's say you hit whatever the 600 hertz, 600 cycle string is, A something, whatever. You can see I know nothing about music, but what'll happen is when it goes through this tube, you're going to get 600, you're going to get 1200 hertz, which is called the second harmonic distortion. You're also going to get 1800 hertz, or 3 times the frequency, that's third harmonic distortion in a certain proportion. And when you combine those together coming out of it, it gives it a sweet sound, different from what you would hear. If you say you ran it through your nice home audio amplifier where they spend thousands of dollars to keep it from producing any distortion whatsoever, it will sound so completely different and probably not even pleasant, especially a solid state amplifier, right, Chris?
Well, that's what I was going to say, is the goal of amplifying something that is from a CD or from an LP or even an MP3. You don't want it to distort at all. You don't want to introduce other frequencies into it. You want to you want high fidelity is what they called it, right? You want to
hear it as the creator intended it to be.
Exactly. But if you listen to the raw sound coming out of your electric guitar, it doesn't sound very good, honestly. And if you if you amplified that in a way that was not distorted, it's not very pleasing to the ear. So that when it does get loud, well, I mean, in some cases it is pleasing, but when it does get loud and it starts to crunch up, which I think was the original question, like when it really gets crunchy in a tube amp, that's exactly the reason that you said.
That's why recording engineers don't record the output of the guitar. They mic the speaker.
Right.
Because they want all that organic crunchy stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean that's the sound is when you drive these tubes past the point where it's a high fidelity, past the point where it's reproducing faithfully what is being sent to it. At least that's the kind of music that I like.
And another thing,
randomness that makes it sound better, essentially.
Another thing that will happen, and I think Laird, you kind of pointed towards this, is you see, well, we got this operating point down at the bottom. You got 270 volts to the left and 170 to the right. That is if you had a perfect equal plus or minus whatever it was going in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the amount of distortion on the bottom that you would have. But also what will happen is if the input goes below 0 volts, you're slammed up against this wall over here and it clips the output. And the same thing happens on the right-hand side. And so it clips, it cuts off the peaks, and that's fuzz. And that's a whole different type of distortion on top of what we were talking about before.
That's even better.
That's when you've cranked it all the way up and it gets that really grungy sound to it.
There you go.
Excellent.
Nice.
I know we're closing in on the time we allotted, and I'm glad that you guys were all here, but I think this deserves another look-see to get into that relationship between current and voltage coming out of not just the 6V6, but those load lines for the 12AX7 too. There's other tubes as well. We need to get Sam Leisinger in here to talk about the wide variety of different electric guitar amp tubes with all these different characteristics.
You don't know Sam. Sam says he has over 100,000 tubes in his collection, and I won't argue with him.
Wow.
He's got some tubes going all the way back to the 19-teens and 20s.
Wow.
No. So are companies still making tubes generally, or?
Not in the U.S.
Yeah, because I remember hearing about people with like big piles of old Soviet tubes and stuff like that.
There's a company is it Romania or something? I actually saw it on How It's Made. I recorded it. I've been meaning to share that with you, Chris. But they're custom tubes, and I think Macintosh still makes them. But generally speaking, they're
Russia,
few and far between.
Wow.
Russia still makes some. China still makes some. Romania still makes some. But if you get like a tube made in the U.S. or in the U.K., it's going to be a new old stock, GE, Sylvania, and you can get it from Sam. He's got a warehouse full of them, but it'll cost you.
So let me ask this. This is sort of off the subject, but when we moved in our house, we found a portable TV from the 1950s or early sort of retro looking TV, and it's got tubes in it.
It's crazy looking.
It is crazy looking. Is that the kind of thing that would be worth something to somebody, or? I mean, it's just sitting in our storage.
No, but then our son tore it apart.
Good for him. That's what I would have done.
Well, he's actually an electrical engineer major.
All right, see, that's what it leads to.
No, but when he was a kid, he totally got into that thing, and I was like,
It might very well have a 12AX7 or some variant of that, because it's a very common tube, and it's useful to. It's in most guitar amps, many guitar amps. So.
Cool.
And then a whole bunch that are useless.
So, Chris, do you prefer your distortion to come from a pedal or to come from your amp?
Why not both?
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I really do like both of them. So one of the other classes that we offer at Decatur Makers in the eShop is a electric guitar effects class, and one of the first ones that we had was for an Ibanez 828 overdrive pedal, a highly sought after circuit that's been ripped off by half a dozen different folks. So you can build them super cheap, and put that into a tube amp. That's best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's what I play usually through a Blues Driver and a Vox AC15. So.
Oh, nice. You need to head over to YouTube and check out a video that it was really Bill who helped me with this one for the Deaky, a replica of John Deacon from Queen, of the amp that he made for their guitar player Brian May. If you like the Vox sound, you'll love that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Let's see if I can link to it in the chat.
That'd be awesome.
Cool. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah.
It's good to see y'all. Hope to see you in person soon.
Maureen, are you going to take the speaker class? You need more speakers.
I've got a few of them around here.
One more
need
pair
to-
won't hurt.
I need to that's true. They're going to make nice gifts. I need to follow up with you guys on the second half because I missed the second half of the last.
These new speakers are the best ever. I got a good deal on some Serwin Vega tweeters that are the best tweeters. They sound wonderful. I'm really impressed with them.
Well, I might have to do it then. Isn't Chris going to build amps also? Aren't you going to build some amps?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We did have a really nice amp circuit picked out.
Yes, you did.
It was like a fun project.
Oh, yeah.
So,
All right.
should it be a tube amp or should it be a solid state for listening to?
That's what we were talking about, was doing the, what is the SE50? I can't remember what it's called. The circuit we got from China, all those boards.
Oh, yeah. I think it was SE50, something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.
That's a good
I'd
sounding.
love to. I've got a pile of transformers and heat sinks in my basement that are getting in my way.
Now, if they'll fit into one of the speaker enclosures, and you can just put a little Bluetooth receiver in there, all right? You just plug in your speakers, and you've got your remote amp there.
Let's do it this fall.
All right, you're on. All right, thanks everybody. It's good to see y'all.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Learned a lot.
All right. Good night.
Night.